When you think of Harvard Business School, what comes to mind? Prestige, opportunity, brilliance? For many, it's a gateway to power, networks, and trust. But what happens when that trust is weaponized, when prestige becomes a tool for deception? That's the story of Project Information Arbitrage, the alleged investment scam that stole over $4 million from people who thought they were investing with a trusted alumnus, and instead, lost everything. This is how the Harvard investment scam unfolded and how lives were shattered in its wake. It began in September 2021. Vladimir Artamonov, a 2003 graduate of Harvard Business School, presented himself not just as a business school alum, but as someone who had cracked a code. He claimed that by examining public insurance regulatory filings from affiliates of Berkshire Hathaway, a company led by Warren Buffett, he could anticipate which securities the conglomerate would buy before the rest of the market caught on. Essentially, Artamonov promised early access to market secrets, claiming that once Berkshire's investments became public, those who were positioned already would profit. He called it Project Information Arbitrage. To many, it sounded brilliant. Low risk, huge reward. It sounded legitimate, backed by Harvard credentials, alumni introductions, and promises of returns that felt too good to ignore. Over the next 2.5 years, Artamonov used his alumni network to raise funds from fellow Harvard Business School graduates and other investors, some alumni, some introduced by trust, friendship, or shared prestige. The amount? More than $4 million raised in total. But instead of executing the clever arbitrage strategy he promised, prosecutors say Artamonov mostly gambled the money on risky short-term options that didn't align with Berkshire's investments or with the promised strategy. Losses piled up, money was misused, and the entire scheme had the hallmarks of what we now call a Ponzi-like structure, using new investor money to repay earlier investors or to maintain the illusion of gains. Among the investors, one former classmate who invested about $100,000 in fall 2021. According to court documents, by late 2021, much of that had already evaporated in Artamonov's risky trades. Only a tiny fraction remained. Another investor, Arndt W. Nicklish, put in 2 installments in 2022. By November of that year, almost all of Nicklish's money was gone, leaving just thousands behind. Similar stories followed. Someone invested $50,000, another $30,000. Requests for transparency or proof of strategy were met with reassurances that profits were just around the corner, that losses were being papered over, that crazy gains were coming at the next reunion of Harvard alumni. These were the stories that lulled people into trust. So, around early 2024, things began to unravel. Investors started demanding withdrawals, documentation, and, proof. Artamonov began repaying just a tiny portion of the money. Some investors got checks, but really it was under $400,000 in total, and that's out of more than $4 million raised. That's less than 10%. No detailed audits, no consistent proof of strategy. Then came the tragic news. One of his early investors, facing a loss of about $100,000, died by suicide. That loss wasn't just financial, it was emotional, personal. It raised the alarm among others. When new investors saw what was happening or asked questions, reassurance was replaced by silence. Lawsuits were filed. Investigations began. Harvard alumni who thought they were investing in someone they knew discovered they were entrusting their money to a claim without substance. By September 2025, federal prosecutors unsealed an indictment. The charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, investment advisor fraud. The jurisdiction? The Southern District of New York, with cooperation from federal agencies and the New York Attorney General. Artamonov was arrested in Elk Ridge, Maryland and released on bail of $300,000 under strict conditions, no contacting victims or potential witnesses, while legal proceedings continue. If convicted, he could face decades behind bars, possible sentences up to 20 years for some charges. Project Information Arbitrage was the branding. Artamonov claimed he could review filings from state insurance regulators, documents that the public insurance subsidiaries of Berkshire Hathaway supposedly filed before the company's SEC disclosures. He claimed to use those filings to predict which stocks Berkshire would move into, buying ahead of them and selling after. In practice, according to prosecutors, his trades often bore no relation to Berkshire's moves. Many were short-term options, risky bets, rather than precursors to long-term investment. When losses mounted, he allegedly hid them, told investors new reports were coming, continued to solicit investments, and used some funds from later investors to pay off parts of earlier ones, classic Ponzi behavior. The social dimension of this fraud is particularly devastating, because, many investors were alumni, people who trusted each other, who believed shared credentials meant shared ethics. Because Artamonov used alumni events, reunions, personal introductions. The betrayal was not just financial, it was emotional. It ripped through communities, friendships, reputations. People who thought they were helping a classmate build something remarkable discovered they were financing someone's personal expenses. Luxury lodging, meals, travel, alcohol. Not subtle luxuries, but honestly clear signs of misuse of investor funds. What lessons can we draw from this $4 million swindle? First, credentials are not proof. Harvard credentials, elite networks, they open doors, they inspire trust, but they do not guarantee competence or truth. Second, no investment strategy is too clever to audit. Promises of early access to confidential info or predictions of what Warren Buffett might do, those should ring alarm bells, not investment offer letters. Third, transparency and documentation matter. Investors should demand clear strategies, verifiable filings, audited returns, not promises, not educated guesses. And fourth, personal connection is often part of the trap. When someone targets your network, your classmates, your schoolmates, you don't want to believe you've been deceived. That makes it easier for fraudsters to take advantage. The impact is still unfolding. Some victims will recover small portions of their losses, others may never recover anything. The emotional toll, loss of trust, shame, regret is impossible to quantify. And there's a legal reckoning ahead, depositions, trial, possibly convictions. But beyond Artamonov himself, this scandal raises larger questions about regulatory oversight, about how investment advice is policed, about how much faith we place in prestige. And yet this story isn't unique. Throughout history, financial frauds often surface in places where trust is highest, in alumni networks, in close-knit communities, in schools, religious settings, professional circles. The more everyone expects you to be honest, the more dangerous it is when someone isn't. The more someone uses that trust, the harder the fall. So, as we watch the case of Vladimir Artamonov move through the courts, there are warnings for everyone. Vet your claims, ask tough questions, don't rely solely on prestige. Wealth isn't always legitimacy. Diploma isn't always proof. Because as this case shows, betrayal can wear a suit and a Harvard degree. If this story struck you, if you want more deep dives into how scams like this happen, what red flags to watch for, and stories of real people impacted, drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you believe trust should be earned and not bought. Share this to warn others in your network, and don't forget to subscribe for more investigative breakdowns that go beyond the headlines. Because sometimes, knowing the truth is the best protection we can have.